What if I told you that 5 friends left a basketball game on a Friday night, and within hours they would become part of one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries? At first, investigators believed it was nothing more than a missing persons case. 5 young men, one car, one cold winter night. But as the evidence began to surface, that simple explanation quickly fell apart, because the place where their car was found made absolutely no sense. And what investigators discovered months later would turn this case into one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. Even today, no one can say with certainty what happened to the Yuba County 5. It was Friday, February 24, 1978 in Yuba City, California. 5 close friends were getting ready for what should have been a memorable evening. Their names were Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Weiher, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. Although each had different personalities, they shared one passion: basketball. The next morning, they were scheduled to play in a tournament they had been looking forward to for weeks. Friends and family later recalled how excited they were. Some had already laid out their uniforms before leaving home. Missing that tournament wasn't even a possibility in their minds. That Friday evening, they drove about 50 miles south to California State University, Chico, where they watched a college basketball game. Witnesses described the group as cheerful. They laughed together, cheered during the game, and left the arena in high spirits. Nothing seemed unusual. After the game ended around 10 p.m., the 5 friends stopped at a convenience store in Chico. Store receipts later confirmed they bought chocolate bars, chips, soft drinks, milk, and snacks. It would become one of the last confirmed moments anyone knew they were alive. Then, they climbed back into Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego. Their destination should have been simple: home. The drive back to Yuba City normally took about an hour and a half. It was a familiar route they had traveled before. Their families expected them home later that night, but they never arrived. When morning came, relatives immediately sensed something was wrong. The 5 men were known for being dependable, especially with the basketball tournament only hours away. None of them would have willingly missed it. As concern turned into panic, families contacted police. At first, investigators believed the friends may have had car trouble somewhere along the highway, but when officers began retracing the route they should have taken, they found nothing. No accident, no skid marks, no broken down vehicle, nothing. Then several days later, everything changed. A forest ranger made an unexpected discovery nearly 70 miles away from the route the men should have been traveling. Parked on a remote mountain road inside the Plumas National Forest was Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. The car wasn't where anyone expected it to be. In fact, it wasn't even close. Instead of heading home, the 5 friends had somehow driven deep into the Sierra Nevada mountains, a place they had no known reason to visit. As investigators approached the abandoned car, they had no idea they were about to step into one of the strangest mysteries America has ever seen. As investigators examined the Mercury Montego, they expected to find a simple explanation. Maybe the engine had failed. Maybe the car had become trapped in deep snow. Maybe the 5 friends had left to find help. But almost immediately, those theories began to fall apart. The car showed no signs of a major accident. It wasn't badly damaged. Investigators later determined that it likely could have been driven back down the mountain with relatively little effort. The fuel tank still contained gasoline. The doors were unlocked. One window was rolled down. Inside the car, everything looked strangely ordinary. The snacks the group had bought after the basketball game were still there. Maps, personal belongings, even jackets had been left behind. Nothing suggested the men had planned to abandon the vehicle yet. All 5 had disappeared. The location of the car only deepened the mystery. It sat on a narrow mountain road, miles away from the route back to Yuba City. According to family members, none of the men had any reason to be in the Plumas National Forest that night. They weren't camping. They weren't hunting. They weren't visiting friends. So why had they driven there? That question has never been answered. As search teams prepared to comb the mountains, investigators received an unexpected statement. A man named Joseph Scons contacted police. He said that on the same night the 5 men disappeared, he had driven into the mountains after suffering a mild heart attack. While trying to get help, his own car became stuck in the snow. As he sat waiting in the freezing darkness, he claimed he saw headlights approaching then. He saw what appeared to be several people near another vehicle. Believing they could rescue him, Skans shouted for help, according to his account. The group didn't respond. Instead, the lights disappeared into the darkness. Years later, investigators continued debating his story. Some believed the freezing temperatures, exhaustion, and his medical condition may have affected his memory. Others believed he had genuinely seen the Yuba County Five during their final known hours, if his account was accurate. It raised an even more disturbing question. Why would five friends ignore someone asking for help? It didn't fit what their families knew about them. Everyone who knew the group described them as kind, respectful, and willing to help others. The contradiction puzzled investigators. Then another detail emerged. Searchers noticed footprints leading away from the abandoned car, instead of staying with a vehicle that offered shelter. The five men had apparently chosen to walk into the freezing wilderness at night, in deep snow, without proper winter equipment. It was a decision that investigators struggled to understand. Had they become frightened? Were they trying to reach help, or were they running from something no one else had seen? Those questions only became more urgent as the search entered its second week. Heavy snow covered the mountains. Helicopters searched from above. Volunteers walked dangerous trails. Every passing day reduced the chances of finding the five friends alive then. When spring finally arrived and the snow began to melt, search teams made a discovery that would transform the entire investigation. Hidden deep inside the forest stood a small Forest Service trailer, and inside, investigators found the first heartbreaking answer. The Forest Service trailer sat deep inside the mountains, far from any town. It wasn't designed to be a permanent home. It was an emergency shelter used by forestry workers during harsh winters. When search teams finally reached it in June of 1978, they expected it to be empty. Instead, they made a discovery that would haunt investigators for decades. Inside the trailer was Ted Weiher. He had not survived, but what shocked investigators wasn't only where he was found. It was how he was found. Ted's body had been carefully wrapped in several blankets. He was lying on a bed, almost as if someone had tried to keep him warm. His beard had grown significantly, suggesting he had survived for weeks after the group disappeared. Medical investigators later concluded that Ted may have lived for as long as 8 to 13 weeks after entering the trailer. That meant one unbelievable thing. Someone had reached shelter. Someone had survived the brutal winter. But then, the evidence became even stranger. The trailer contained a large supply of emergency food. There were canned meals, military-style survival rations, blankets, warm clothing, matches, fuel, everything needed to help someone survive. Yet much of it had never been used. Investigators estimated there was enough food to keep a person alive for a long time. The heating system inside the trailer could also have been operated. Instructions were available, but it had never been turned on. It was as if the people inside either didn't know how to use the supplies, or never realized what was available. For investigators, this created one of the biggest contradictions in the entire case. How could someone survive for weeks inside a shelter full of emergency supplies, yet leave so much untouched? The questions didn't stop there. Ted could not have cared for himself alone for that long. Evidence suggested someone else had been with him after reaching the trailer. Someone had wrapped him in blankets. Someone had likely helped him during his final days. But whoever that person was, they were gone. Outside the trailer, search teams expanded their search area. A short distance away, they discovered the remains of Jack Hewitt and Bill Sterling. The two men had died in the wilderness while trying to make their way through the freezing mountains. Months later, investigators also located Jack Madruga. He was found farther down the mountain, not far from where the Mercury Montego had been abandoned. The heartbreaking discoveries answered one question. The five friends had not simply disappeared, but they created an even greater mystery. Only one man remained missing, Gary Matthews, despite extensive searches. No trace of him was ever found. No clothing, no remains, no confirmed sightings, nothing. To this day, Gary Matthews has never been located, and his disappearance has fueled decades of speculation. Did he survive longer than the others? Did he leave the mountains? Or was he lost somewhere the search teams never reached? Investigators had finally found 4 of the 5 men. But instead of solving the mystery, the evidence had made it even more confusing. Every discovery answered one question and raised 3 more. By the summer of 1978, investigators had recovered 4 of the 5 friends, but instead of bringing closure, the discoveries opened the door to even more questions. The official investigation continued for months, with detectives carefully reconstructing the group's final movements. They interviewed family members, friends, witnesses, forest employees, search and rescue teams. Everyone was asked the same question. Why did the 5 men drive into the mountains? No one had an answer. Investigators examined the possibility that they had simply become lost. At first, it sounded reasonable. It was dark. The roads twisted through unfamiliar terrain. A wrong turn could have taken them farther into the wilderness. But there was one problem. The route into the mountains required dozens of miles of driving away from home. It wasn't a single missed exit. It was a long, continuous journey in the wrong direction. That made the "they got lost" theory much harder to accept. Another theory suggested the group may have followed another vehicle. Perhaps they believed someone was leading them toward a shortcut. Or maybe they were trying to help someone. But investigators found no evidence proving another vehicle had been involved. No confirmed tire tracks. No reliable witness placing another car with them. It remained only a possibility. Then detectives looked closely at Gary Mathias. Unlike the other 4 men, Gary had served in the U.S. Army and was considered more experienced outdoors. Some investigators wondered if he had led the group after they left the car. If anyone could have found the Forest Service trailer, many believed it would have been Gary. That theory also raised another question. If Gary helped the others reach safety, what happened to him afterward? His disappearance remains one of the biggest unanswered mysteries in the entire case. Some investigators believed he may have left the trailer in search of help and never made it back. Others thought he could have become disoriented in the harsh weather, despite repeated searches over the years. No confirmed trace of Gary Mathias has ever been found. As detectives reviewed every piece of evidence, they noticed another disturbing pattern. There was no sign of robbery, no evidence that the men had planned to disappear, no proof of a violent confrontation at the car, no clear indication of foul play. Yet, nothing about their decisions made sense. Why leave a car that could likely have been driven? Why walk for miles through deep snow and freezing temperatures? Why not use the emergency supplies inside the trailer more completely? Every answer created another contradiction. Nearly 50 years later, investigators still cannot explain the sequence of events with certainty. The Yuba County Five remain one of America's most puzzling unsolved mysteries, not because there are no clues, but because the clues refuse to fit together. For nearly 5 decades, the story of the Yuba County Five has remained frozen in time. Every few years, someone looks at the evidence and believes they've finally found the missing piece. But before long, another contradiction appears, and the mystery begins all over again. Today, investigators and researchers generally agree on only a handful of confirmed facts. The 5 friends attended a basketball game in Chico on the evening of February 24, 1978. They stopped at a convenience store on their way home. For reasons that remain unknown, they drove far into the Plumas National Forest instead of returning to Yuba City. Their car was abandoned on a remote mountain road. Months later, 4 of the 5 men were found. The 5th, Gary Mathias, has never been found. Everything beyond those facts becomes far less certain. Some believe the group simply became lost and panicked. Others argue that doesn't explain why they continued driving so far into the mountains. Some think they may have followed another vehicle, but no evidence has ever confirmed that. Others wonder whether an unexpected encounter frightened them into leaving the safety of their car. Again, there is no proof. And then there's the Forest Service trailer, perhaps the most haunting location in the entire case. It offered shelter, food, blankets, supplies that could have saved lives. Yet many of those resources remained untouched. Even experienced investigators struggled to explain why. Was it confusion, fear, exhaustion, or something else entirely? And then there is Gary Mathias. His disappearance may be the biggest mystery of all, if he survived longer than the others. Where did he go if he left the trailer searching for help? Why was no trace of him ever found? Nearly half a century has passed. Snow has fallen on those mountains thousands of times. Roads have changed, forests have grown, witnesses have grown older, some have passed away. But the questions remain exactly where they were in 1978, waiting. The Yuba County Five is remembered not only because 5 lives were lost, but because every answer seems to uncover another mystery. Sometimes the most unsettling cases aren't the ones with no evidence. They're the ones with evidence that refuses to tell a complete story. Maybe the truth disappeared into the mountains that winter night, or maybe someone somewhere still knows what really happened and has never come forward. Until that day, the Yuba County Five will remain one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. So after hearing the evidence, what do you think happened? Did the 5 friends simply lose their way in the freezing wilderness, or is there one missing piece of the puzzle that investigators have never found? The mystery is still open, and perhaps the answer is still waiting to be discovered.